Mars is the second closest planet to Earth in the solar system, and because of its axial tilt and day length are the most similar to ours, it's top of the list of planets for us to visit and explore beyond our moon. In theory, the technology already exists to facilitate the first manned trip, but there are a number of complications and hurdles that we'll need to overcome to ensure this is done safely and one day lead to mankind taking its first steps on the Red Planet. Before we dive in, if you haven't already, subscribe to Most Extreme and ring the bell to get notified of our latest videos. Now let's begin. In recent years, SpaceX has become the world's leading private space exploration company, having worked alongside NASA to develop reusable heavy-lift rockets. This only represents the first step of Elon Musk's original ambitions, however, because his main goal is to send humans to Mars by the end of this decade. The issues we're facing. While from a technological standpoint, the plans to take the first people to Mars and establish a colony are completely feasible, but there remain a number of challenges that have to be solved before the entire concept is deemed safe enough for use on a manned flight. With major concerns being focused around the ability to keep humans in a comfortable enough environment for the 8-month journey there, duration on Mars, and the trip back to Earth. In fact, one of the main experiments being carried out on the ISS currently is looking at the long-term effects of space travel on the human body. And the learning from this will need to be taken into account before any attempts can be made. The environment on Mars is very different from that on Earth. While humans would experience zero gravity on the journey there and back, on the planet itself, the gravity is only 38% of that on Earth, which means travelers may have to endure 2 or 3 years of weightlessness. And from studies undertaken on the ISS, we know that this has a major impact on the way muscles and bones develop in the body, and it'll lead to a substantial period of readjustment after returning to Earth. Alignment of the planets. Flying to Mars isn't as simple as building a powerful enough rocket and then launching it in the right direction. Because of the way the planets orbit the Sun, there are times when the distance between Earth and Mars is much shorter than others. The minimum distance between the two planets is approximately 34 million miles, depending on various factors, and this only occurs once every 2 years. This means that, for the shortest trip, there's a very precise launch window, and the journey itself will take around 8 months. This also means any crew that travel to the Red Planet would likely need to stay there for at least a year before beginning their journey to Earth, to ensure the planets had once again aligned for the shortest possible travelling distance. How do we make the journey to Mars? Successful spaceflight is all about balancing competing factors, and SpaceX has proposed a plan for flying to the Moon it claims is the most efficient way of doing so. For example, there currently isn't any way of launching directly from Earth with enough rocket fuel needed to complete the entire 70 million mile round trip, because most of the fuel is used from breaking through Earth's dense atmosphere. This is why so much effort has gone into developing the Super Heavy rocket booster. The idea is that the flight will take part in several stages. The first will be for Starship to launch from Earth and enter orbit, where it may even dock with the ISS. Once this is complete, supply ships will be sent up to fully refuel with all its needs to reach the Red Planet. And this would be likely when the full crew, with all of their supplies, will board Starship for the first time during the mission. Next, Starship will begin the 8-month journey to Mars, and after entering the planet's atmosphere, it will land upright on the surface. And since Starship is reusable, it'll then be able to launch itself from Mars for the return trip to Earth. One of the cleverest parts of Musk's design is that, at this stage, Starship won't have much rocket fuel left, and definitely not enough for another 8-month journey. It's all reliant on being able to source rocket fuel on Mars, which is a mixture of methane and oxygen that's known as deep cryomethalox from Mars itself. To do this, SpaceX will have previously sent payloads on uncrewed Starship missions, and these will have delivered everything needed to get up and running. By 2024, SpaceX hopes to send the first of 2 robotic ships to Mars, which will be called Heart of Gold, and these will leave around 100 tons of cargo each, including a huge array of solar panels to generate electricity, mining equipment to allow for the extraction of useful minerals and chemicals on the planet, surface vehicles, food, and basic life support infrastructure, so when humans arrive, they'll have the basic provisions they need to survive. Another 4 flights, 2 of which will be robotic, and the first 2 manned ones, will then deliver the final supplies and set up all of the equipment to hopefully end up with a habitable complex complete with landing pods, solar plants, and a propellant manufacturing plant that derives methane and oxygen from subsurface water ice and the CO2 in the atmosphere to make fuel with, as well as providing breathable air. Living in biospheres. To begin with, people on Mars would use the starships as their living quarters, but as development progresses, purpose-built biosphere modules will eventually offer larger spaces and dedicated research areas. For the first astronauts to set foot on the planet, the main source of nutrition will come from field ration packs, similar to those used by military personnel, but the hope would be that the construction of greenhouses will eventually allow for fresh vegetables to be grown, which along with locally sourced water will be able to provide most of the diet that anyone would need. As for what the astronauts will actually do during their journey and while they're on the planet, the plan is for their time to be arranged in a similar way as it is when they go to the ISS. It'll largely be made up of conducting vital experiments to help gather data for future trips. There'll also be exercise equipment to help combat muscle atrophy and a huge database of movies and TV shows to watch during any downtime. Once these basics are operational, there will truly be no limit on how much the base on Mars could then be expanded, because each starship that journeys there will be able to deliver more materials, while the base will be virtually self-sufficient. Changing Mars' atmosphere. One idea that's always been prevalent when talking about colonizing Mars is the notion that we may actually be able to terraform it so that the surface is much more similar to that of Earth. If this were possible, it'll make it far easier to live there, and we wouldn't need to be confined to structures that provide life support. There are several ideas that could result in this outcome, but some are controversial to say the least. It's believed that Mars was once Earth-like, but around 4 billion years ago the magnetic field from its iron core shut down. So could it be possible to reverse these effects? Elon Musk has suggested his preferred idea, which would involve detonating nuclear bombs at each of the planet's poles. Claiming the radiation wouldn't be a problem because it would be released into space, the suggestion is that the heat that's generated would melt the carbon dioxide that's frozen in the ice caps, which would enter the atmosphere and begin a process similar to the greenhouse effect, and that the planet will begin to warm up and the water ice would become liquid. The main problem with this, apart from the ethical concerns, is that it might not even release enough carbon dioxide to achieve the required effect, because researchers aren't even sure if enough of the gas exists on Mars in the first place. This has led to various other suggestions of how to achieve the aim, which could involve purposefully redirecting thousands of comets and meteors to strike the planet, with each one adding a small amount to the atmosphere, or even the use of genetically modified algae that could be grown on the surface and, over a period of decades, or even centuries, will build up enough of a concentration of useful gases in the atmosphere that the temperature and pressure will increase to be somewhat similar to that on Earth. Final thoughts. Incredibly, the first human mission to Mars could well be possible much sooner than we think, and if everything SpaceX is undertaking goes to plan, it could well happen within this decade. There's no denying it would be a long, risky and arduous journey though, and while there are some ideas on how we can adjust conditions there to be more favourable to life, we would for a long time have to rely on artificial habitation modules. Despite this, it'll represent a major step towards longer-term goals of being able to live on other planets, and is a truly exciting development in space exploration. What are your thoughts on travelling to Mars, and what do you think living in biospheres would be like? Let us know in the comments below. That's it for today. Don't forget to subscribe to Most Extreme and ring the bell to get notified of our latest videos. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.